days and pleasant nights, fellow followers and fans of the man that I believe always lives up to his name, Mr. Stephen King. Bienvenidos and welcome to the Horror Show. My name is Jaime and Fuego, and this is a program that I do every single Sunday late night here, where we basically talk about my favorite author. As you can tell from this big stack of books that is beside me, he is my favorite author. I have started almost 8 years ago at this point reading all of his stuff. I'm actually down to the Bill Hodges trilogy right now. I am about to start, that's why you're not seeing it over there, Mr. Mercedes. Very excited about that, and very excited to be talking about Stephen King with you this week. Now, this episode's going up a little bit later than anticipated, or so I'm thinking, because of the fact that, yeah, we have the Walking Dead finale this evening as well. So, yeah, that, you know, it's a show that Stephen King likes, but we're not here to talk about the Walking Dead. We are here to talk about El Rey, the King, and my personal favorite author, as I mentioned. And so, every week when I get this show together, I've been trying to make it adapt and evolve over the course of the time that I've been doing it. Now, the Dark Tower novels aside, which, as you can see right there, Wizard and Glass is the novel of his from that series that I am currently rereading. You can find that retro review coming on the 19th of April here. I've already done the first 3 books. I'm rereading 1 book a month, leading up to the film finally coming in. So this week I was kind of thinking I wanted to do a little bit more Stephen King news, and from now on start off the festivities with a little bit of news about the guy. And it's, as it was said by either Variety or The Hollywood Reporter earlier this week, this is fixing in 2017 to be the biggest year for Stephen King as far as adaptations and popularity in decades. And so I'm just going to notch through some news real quick. First and foremost, we have the Mist television series that is being developed by a gentleman by the name of Christian Torp. And he did a recent interview with Liljan's Library, where he was basically talking about how, you know, he finally got to show the pilot for this television series to the King, and he was saying that it's amusing seeing an email in your inbox from Stephen King, because it's just as exciting and terrifying as reading it back when he was 12 years old. And King said that the pilot for the Mist television series was pretty damn good. Now, I know, guys, that was a little vague, and makes me wonder just how much King actually liked it, if he's saving the face or whatever, but I'm pretty excited about this series. Now, the Mist novella was originally in Skeleton Crew, and I think it was one of the longest stories in that collection of shorts that King put out in these early 80s, if I'm not mistaken. But the novella ended very differently than the Frank Darabont adaptation that he did, which had Thomas Jane and Carol from The Walking Dead, all these other people who would eventually show up on that show, which is kind of funny. But spoiler territory, if you guys don't want to hear this, don't want to know how the novel actually ended compared to how the film ended, I would say give us a little mute for maybe 30 seconds until I give you the thumbs up once again. So here we go. The novella basically ends with our protagonist that Thomas Jane portrayed and his son actually making it out of the grocery store, and they're just kind of chilling, hanging out in a Holiday Inn, and it was basically one of those King giving the silver lining that he is so fond of. His books, with the exception of only a handful, I mean, Pet Sematary being probably the biggest one that I always go back to since it's one of my 3 favorites ever, he usually gives hope at the end, and so that's the aforementioned silver lining. But Darabont had the idea, and I can't recall if he co-wrote the screenplay or even had anything to do with it beyond the directing. If you guys recall or can clarify properly for me, leave it in the comments below. But Darabont changed things significantly. He had all of those survivors who made it out of the grocery store, and when all the creatures started coming out of those weird Lovecraftian portals that the government so asininely opened, that they all ended up just killing each other. Like, they're like, okay, we saved some bullets, so you're getting one, you're getting one, you're getting a car, you're getting a bullet, you're getting a bullet. Yeah, and then when it came down to Thomas Jane, there was no bullets left after he killed his son, and then lo and behold, the actress who plays Carol in The Walking Dead, I love Carol, by the way, yeah, she ends up walking out of the mist, and you realize, oh, she went and looked for the government assistance, and she found it, and she ended up surviving after she left all the insanity that was going down in the grocery store. So I think it's exciting that this series is supposed to pay homage to the original novella and the film. It's drawing a little bit of inspiration from both, obviously, but it's supposed to be its own thing, different characters. I think that when the mist comes in to that particular town, there are so many different stories and so many different creatures that you could feature, and so I am extremely excited for this Spike Television series. Unfortunately, we do not have a release date yet. We just know sometime in 2017 it's going to be coming. So for our next news story, this is actually a short that I covered in a video that you guys can check out here on the channel. It was before Hail to Stephen King started proper. It was another one of those, like, doing the lure and, you know, testing out the audience interest and anticipation and whatnot. But there was a Richard Matheson tribute collection, I guess, that came out in 2009, and it was called I Am Legend, you know, which is obviously a nod to his story. And it's funny, I was reading a recent King interview where he was on the Late Show. Craig Ferguson, I think, is the host there, and this was from a few years ago, obviously, but he said that even though everybody is like, you're so influenced by Lovecraft and Poe, and he was like, well, I was, but I was more influenced at the end of the day by West Coast writers like Richard Matheson, and he gave him a very deliberate and direct shout out, which I thought was pretty BA on King's part. And so, I mean, I love I Am Legend. I love especially the Omega Man, which was an adaptation that was done with that's right, Moses himself from the Ten Commandments, Ben-Hur, Mr. Charlton Heston, and yeah, if you guys haven't seen I Am Legend, it's a little, or excuse me, if you guys haven't seen the Omega Man, I Am Legend with Will Smith, it was okay. Last Man on Earth, I think, was the one that they did that had Vincent Price in it. That was good too, but my personal favorite is the Omega Man. It's awesome. But in 2009, King collaborated with his son Joe Hill on a short story which was called Throttle. And Throttle was combed together for an audio release that was read by Stephen Lang, which actually served as inspiration for Throttle, and they called it Road Rage. And Road Rage is actually, you can probably not see too well right here, I'm going to disrupt the flow of Roland and everything over there, but Road Rage was the name of the comic book adaptation that they did of the same story. So Duel by Richard Matheson was essentially about this guy who was trying to get to San Francisco, driving his car around, and this dude in like a big truck is like, or it was either a truck or a semi or something like that. I think it was a semi, if I'm not mistaken, but keeps cutting him off, and they're playing a cat and mouse game. And so Joe Hill, King's son, and El Rey himself, they collaborated together for this Richard Matheson collection on the aforementioned Throttle, and it was interestingly done. They were essentially cooking meth. It was either somewhere close to Vegas or somewhere in Arizona. I can't recall exactly, but it was interesting because the meth house blows up and there were people killed that were trying to escape it and stuff like that, and so it turns into a conflict between somebody in a enormous vehicular once again, but this time they're actually like mowing down bikers on the highway. And so this is going to be adapted, after already seeing a comic book version, into a feature film. Now, the only apprehension that I have about this is I'm not sure if it has enough like meat in it to actually be a feature film. It's similar feelings that I had with Dolan's Cadillac, which was not a bad adaptation, but when you're trying to stretch a short story into a feature, I mean, sometimes it works, like with Riding the Bullet and The Night Flyer, which are both badass, and then in other instances, it's kind of like The Mangler, or, you know, a few others that I just don't think worked so well. But it's interesting because the writer of a film called Maggie that had my dude Arnie, that's right, the one-man army, Mr. Schwarzenegger, in it. It had the girl from Little Miss Sunshine, Abigail Breslin, I believe her name is. I might have forgot the last name proper, but yeah, his daughter is turning into a zombie, and it was such a wonderfully done film. A guy named John Scott III. Yes, you have a very vanilla name, sir. Much love to you nonetheless. But yeah, he is going to be apparently adapting this to script, and that's some news that you're going to see us talking about on the Horror Show News next Friday, which we do every single Friday, the News with Booze. But this is going to be me just doing a Stephen King roundup of information here on Sundays for you. So I think a throttle feature, maybe that's, you know, kind of just overdoing it just a little bit, but hey, the story is kick-ass. I really enjoyed it, and I look forward to how it comes together and looking at it. But as far as the next big Stephen King release that is not on the visual side of things, that's actually on the literary side of things, is Sleeping Beauties. Now, Sleeping Beauties we talked about on the Horror Show News at one particular point, because it is his first official collaboration in lengthy form with his son, Owen King. Now, Owen King, I believe, is the baby of the brood, and so Joe Hill is the oldest. There is a daughter in the middle who I think is like a preacher or something, which is kind of crazy, but Owen King, much like Joe, has followed in the footsteps of his father, which is pretty rad, and he's done some of his own short fiction and long-form fiction, but for Sleeping Beauties, he is actually collaborating with his father, and they released the first cover image for this upcoming novel. And I must also say that Cemetery Dance, who I love so much, announced this week that they are going to be doing a special edition of this book that I'm certain I will be buying. Shout out to Mr. Richard Chismar and all of the Cemetery Dance people. I love you guys. I just finally obtained this past week a copy of From a Buick 8 on eBay. I've been trying to get that for so long, and it's coming to me from Canada currently, and I can't wait to do a deep dive. As one of the viewers here on Hail to Stephen King suggested in the comments to one of my recent videos. And I just wanted to give a quick reading of the synopsis, because they also released that this past week, and it comes out on my co-host Cecil's birthday, which is awesome. It's also, ironically, the same birthday as my middle brother and 6 days after my own, which is pretty cool. So here it goes. In a future so real and near it might be now, something happens when women go to sleep. They become shrouded in a cocoon-like gauze. If they are awakened, if the gauze wrapping their bodies is disturbed or violated, the women become feral and spectacularly violent. And while they sleep, they go to another place. The men of our world are abandoned, left to their increasingly primal devices. One woman, however, the mysterious Evie, is immune to the blessing or curse of the sleeping disease. Is Evie a medical anomaly to be studied, or is she a demon who must be slain? Set in a small Appalachian town whose primary employer is a women's prison, Sleeping Beauties is a wildly provocative, gloriously absorbing father-son collaboration between Stephen King and Owen Hill. And so, yeah guys, I gotta say, based on that description alone, I am supremely excited. I had heard that it was taking place in a women's prison. I had already heard about kind of the concept, but the way that it was described in that synopsis, you can also currently read an excerpt from the book on Entertainment Weekly at EW.com. So I urge all of you, if you have that curiosity tickling your fancies, to go and do that. This is a book that I am extremely excited about. It's supposed to be like nearly 800 pages, which is super BA for the King, and so yeah, that is some cool new information that we got from Stephen King on the literary side in a season where everything is all about adaptations for him, at least so far in 2017. But the biggest bit of information this week is most definitely the fact that the first trailer for Stephen King's It hit the internet, and it hit it with a vengeance, my friends. Andres Muschietti, who's doing the film, I still have not seen Mama, so I can't gauge his visual prowess or anything like that, but the trailer for the horror show, the reaction that Cecil and I did, absolutely crushed. Now, we're not big time. We are still slowly building the beast, as I like to say, almost as if a snowball is going downhill. But the most liked video that we have ever had on the horror show was a trailer reaction for the video game The Last of Us Part 2 that we did. And that was like around 400 something likes, I think, and yet it was viewed by like 30,000+ people, which is pretty awesome. But this one has been liked over 500 times in the span of like 3-4 days, something of that nature. And the biggest bit of information to mention is the fact that it nearly broke the internet. Stephen King's It, the remake trailer for the Losers Club, because they're only focusing upon the kids for this movie, it is the most watched trailer in history for its first 24 hours. So I think the previous record was Beauty and the Beast, and then the Fate of the Furious, or some crap like that. I don't really watch those movies, so I can't really say anything good or bad about the Fast and the Furious business, but that most recent Fast and Furious trailer was the most watched, and it was 137 million in the first 24 hours. But guys, the Stephen King It trailer did nearly 200 million in 24 hours. It was 193 plus million in 24 hours, which really shows there's more interest in this movie than myself, being a journalist in the industry, anticipated, probably than the studio even anticipated, which means you need to greenlight and get going that sequel with the adults, although I have a sad suspicion that it's not going to be as endearing of a response to seeing just the adults in comparison with just the kids. That was one of the things that I still have mixed feelings about for this for this approach. As amazing as the trailer looked, I think jumping back and forth between the adults and the kids was a good idea. That's the way they did it in the original 1990 miniseries. That's the way the King did it in the original book. And it's all going to depend on who they cast as the adults, and if they're kind of schmucky and they don't do that good of a job. It would be really unfortunate if this version, which looks amazing and gave me genuine goosebumps for the first time I've watched a trailer in forever, if the adult casting just doesn't work as well, regardless of how great the cinematography from the guy who did the original Old Boy is, or, you know, the direction of Muschietti or whatever. Yeah, I'm more apprehensive now about the potential sequel with the adults than I am about you know, the original one with the kids, because that one looks amazing. Although we didn't hear Pennywise talk, which was kind of odd. So in any event, we will move on to our next bit of news information, as excited as I am about this. One other thing to mention before I forget is that there is an artist who did a diorama of the 1950s dairy, and photos are floating around here on the internet, and damn are they cool. His name is Cassiopeia Sakanworkler. Yeah, that is quite a name, sir. I am loving it and respecting it. His website is, well, I'm just going to put it down there so I don't butcher the pronunciation any further. I think it's a German website, if I'm not mistaken, but this diorama that he did of 1958 dairy is incredible. So yeah, if you guys get the opportunity, you definitely need to check out that diorama. I've got some photos, obviously, that you just got done looking through, but seek it out further, look at some additional stuff, and I think you will really, you devoted Stephen King fans, be appreciative. Now, there was some additional information this week that came out about The Shining, and the reason for it is because The Shining, the original book, the novel that King wrote, is celebrating its 40th anniversary this year, and that's why I did a look back video here before Hail to Stephen King, the ongoing show, was properly happening every Sunday. I did a 40th anniversary retrospective about The Shining, looking at the novel, the film that Kubrick did, the controversial film for many Stephen King fans, and then the adaptation miniseries that Mick Garris helped Stephen King out with. And the reasoning that the movie was so controversial is the sheer fact that it changed so much. Like, the tone, you did not feel the love and the just genuine closeness amongst that family. I mean, it was a very cold, just as cold as Jack Nicholson freezing his ass off and dying at the end of the movie, instead of blowing up with the boiler room as happened in the novel. And yeah, that's why it's crazy to hear them discussing different endings and how they had so many different potential endings for this, because everybody knows that, as opposed to the boiler room thing, the Overlook was still standing at the end of it and still there to wreak havoc, which would really not tie in properly, and maybe that's why they haven't adapted Dr. Sleep yet. for the big screen because of the fact that the novel follows the continuity of the book, and there is no hotel there anymore. It's almost like a weird camping ground. And guys, stay tuned, because very soon I'm going to be doing a Dr. Sleep retrospective as kind of a part 2 to my Shining thing, because I loved Dr. Sleep, and I read that just a few months ago, shortly before I did a revival, which was also amazing. And so yeah, I'm going to continue the 40th anniversary celebrations, but in a discussion that Entertainment Weekly once again did with the producer Jan Harlan and then the co-writer Diane Johnson, they basically talked about how they wanted, Kubrick specifically, wanted different people to die at the end to shock audiences. So fans of the novel were going to get thrown off, you know. He talked about Jack dying. He talked about Danny Torrance dying. He talked about the mom dying. I mean, they basically, in the writer's room, presumably, had all of these different potential things. I'm not sure if they filmed any of them. I don't think that they went into that additional detail, but they did just show that they were very uncertain about how to conclude the movie, and inevitably they decided to go with something drastically different. And I have mixed feelings about it. I really do, you know, because I think as far as Kubrick's film goes, it's its own entity, and it's awesome in that regard, but the fact that there were so many things omitted and you didn't feel the genuine love of the family, you know, hey, if you guys want to see me talk about it in additional detail, please check out the 40th anniversary of Stephen King's The Shining, which I'm going to put a link in the stuff here at the end so you guys can check it out. And that will be the proper Ka wheel coming all the way around, which is a very good segue. And I used that specifically, guys, because of the fact that we had a little bit of Dark Tower info this week. And it was of the good and the bad variety. So, well, actually, no, maybe for some people it was of the entirely bad variety, because of the fact that, once again, the Dark Tower has been delayed. Yeah. Now, I was really skeptical when I was like, okay, so the Dark Tower is coming out in July, and It is coming out in September, and yet we are getting an It trailer before a Dark Tower trailer? What in the hell is going on here? And so that made me scratch my head a little bit. But apparently they did show some footage of the film at CinemaCon this past week, and audiences and different journalists that I follow on Twitter, they all said that it looks badass. So I'm going to try to find some solace in that. But the bigger thing, beyond the fact that it's been delayed, and I'm not really going to touch much upon it because it was only delayed a week, so as opposed to July 28th, now it's coming out August 4th, so that's really nothing to shake a stick at. The fact that they delayed it a single week, I'm thinking they're trying to get a little distance between a specific release that's coming before or after, maybe a little bit more time to crush, because just doing it a single week after, I mean, it was already delayed from January to February to July, and now it's August, so who the hell knows. But the bigger and crazier thing for me is the fact that there was all of this speculation about the fact that it's going to start a Stephen King shared universe on the big screen, and I don't think that that's going to happen. I think that there was a lot of sites that were running with clickbait, where they were basically like, Stephen King shared universe is coming, you know, because the CinemaCon footage that was shown hinted at the Overlook Hotel that I just mentioned, you know, talking about The Shining, and there's always been Easter eggs in Stephen King movies. We're talking miniseries, big screen films. I mean, it's like a little nod and wink to the really deep diving fans like myself and you who are probably watching this. And so I was kind of irritated by the fact that so many sites ran with this as a story. It really just shows the clickbait mentality of internet websites in an era where print is dead, because I started with print journalism, you know, and I had magazines die under me, and so that's why I'm sitting talking to a camera with you guys here as opposed to writing. And it's just a little irritating when people are that desperate for viewership and they're just kind of, I mean, uphold some integrity, for God's sake, as opposed to, I mean, Bev Vincent, who I have a big debt of gratitude for writing a book called The Road to the Dark Tower, indebted to him. I was tweeting with him earlier this week, and he was just like, people are really getting ahead of themselves, and it's not going to be like blatant reference city or anything of that nature, which is going to segue very well into the viewer question, which we have this week that I'm about to get into. So yeah, I was just kind of irked by everybody saying that there is a Stephen King cinematic universe. As much as I would love it, we know the Stephen King shared cinematic universe is going to happen with the Castle Rock television series, which brings me to our viewer question this week, which is by a frequent fan of the horror show. His name is Cobra Kai. You are winning a Coexist t-shirt, and make sure to hit us up on the horror show so I can get your shipping information, and we can get you either a white Coexist shirt so you can splatter blood on it. Yep, check that out. Or we can get you a black one as well. I'm not going to go into immense detail, but Cobra Kai, thanks so very much for your frequent viewership, man. It's supremely appreciated. And Cobra Kai essentially said, let's get right to it. Have you seen the huge news and trailer? Castle Rock! J.J. Abrams is directing it. Not true, unfortunately. He is developing it. I couldn't believe it. A Stephen King universe television series. So yeah, sad to burst the bubble about the fact that he is not directing it, but much like with Lost and 11/22/63, his Bad Robot production company is developing it. I'm not sure if he's actually directing personally any of the episodes of the series, but I know for a fact, because we talked about it on the news this past week, that Mark Bernardin, who is a homie of Kevin Smith on Fat Man on Batman, I love Kevin Smith, Clerks and Aliens, just FYI, are my two favorite movies of all time. Single syllable, single word, supremely different, obviously, but yeah, Mark Bernardin is a friend of K. Smith, and he is in the writer's room working on this Castle Rock TV series. Like, this was a big enough opportunity that he actually left his work at the LA Times as the editor of the film section to work on this TV show, which means he's probably a big King aficionado, much like myself, and very excited because this TV series is supposed to explore all of the different inner workings of the Stephen King extended universe. Like, they were hoping the Dark Tower is starting, and I don't personally believe the Dark Tower is starting that. As Bev Vincent, once again, shout out to that awesome dude, mentioned, I basically asked him, I'm like, they're probably saving that sort of crossover stuff for the Castle Rock show, right? And he was just like, yeah, exactly, that's definitely where they're going to leave it for. And so Castle Rock is a very interesting place because it first showed up in the Dead Zone, but then King was enamored with it for a number of years in the 80s and the early 90s because he said stories like Cujo there, and they were talking about the same sheriff who was doing the Dead Zone, stuff with John Smith, and then you had The Body, obviously, which everybody remembers because of the fact that Rob Reiner directed that incredible movie Stand By Me, which was based on the short story, or novella, I guess I should say, which, if you've never read the novella from different seasons called The Body that they drew the inspiration from for, oh man, it is incredible. I love Stand By Me. Rob Reiner did such a tremendous job with it. But then you've got short stories like Uncle Otto's Truck, where, the guy is thinking like a vehicle is possessed and he's living right next to it, and that one's okay. I still prefer From a Buick 8, as I mentioned earlier. But one of my favorite Castle Rock short stories is Mrs. Todd's Shortcut, because it's basically about, it's almost like interdimensional travel. This woman has a crazy super fast shortcut that she can take on the highway. That one is super cool. The Dark Half has some ties with Castle Rock, despite taking place in Ludlow, which is where Pet Cemetery took place. King is big. He basically created a entire, almost like what Kevin Smith did, with the View Askew universe. You have all these different places in Jersey. In King's case, you have all these different places in Maine that are fictional, but yet they're all cognizant of each other and they all relate to one another. Some of the last few Castle Rock stories were It Grows on You, which was very, very good. You also had The Sundog, which was kind of a prequel to Needful Things, and It Grows on You was like almost like a sequel tie-up to chapter. Needful Things, guys, if you haven't read that story, it was dubbed as the last Castle Rock story at the time. We briefly discussed it on the news. It was adapted into a fantastic film with Ed Harris, but imagine if a very sinister creature, they never confirm, if I'm not mistaken, if he has any Dark Tower Crimson King affiliations, but he easily could, you know, with the fact that he moves into Castle Rock and opens up a shop where anything you might possibly need or be interested in, it's there. It is a fantastically done story. It's so, so good. One of my favorite kind of tying in with Castle Rock short stories is The Man in the Black Suit, because of the fact that this is about this kid who like goes out to the stream and basically sees the devil showing up in a suit and enticing him and talking to him, and it is so crazy and so creepy. And Nona is another one where there's this guy who encounters this crazy woman, and she compels him to kill people, and he's like in love with her. And it's really interesting how Ace Merrill, who was played by Kiefer Sutherland in Stand By Me, yeah, that character shows back up in Needful Things. He is a key person there. And he's also in this short story. And so, once again, King tying everything together. The reason that, you know, characters from Rose Madder, like I mentioned in the last video, like the girl at the women's group home who is a lead character in Desperation. The fact that Father Callahan from Salem's Lot shows back up in the Dark Tower. The fact that Brodigan from Hearts in Atlantis shows up in the later Dark Tower, you know, books as well. I mean, King is so into Flag, obviously, and, you know, him showing up in The Eyes of the Dragon and the Dark Tower, and so King is all about world building. He's all about tying stuff together. If we're speaking Castle Rock specifically, there are so many others that have either references or nods to it, from Graveyard Shift to Creepshow, Shawshank Redemption, Pet Sematary, the short story Grandma, It, Gerald's Game, and Gerald's Game tied in with Dolores Claiborne, which a lot of people don't necessarily know. The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon, which I have both the pop-up book and the actual novel of. Riding the Bullet, a fantastic short story that Cemetery Dance also did some stuff with. N, which was done as an incredible comic book by, I believe, Marvel, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, indeed. And, I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Lizie's story, or Lacey's story, I should say. Under the Dome, 11/22/63, which had a dairy connection. A Good Marriage, Dr. Sleep Revival. I mean, once again, King is rich with his lore. He loves tying stuff together. And another good reason for us to actually mention this is because of the fact that there is a new Castle Rock story coming that King co-wrote with Richard Chismar from the aforementioned Cemetery Dance. It's called Wendy's Button Box, and I have no idea if this is going to directly tie in with the television series or what, but Hulu's adaptation of this that JJ is working on, I cannot even describe my anticipation, because it is supposed to be basically able to play with any of the characters, as long as they have the licensing rights, from Stephen King's universe, and then it's probably, as I'm thinking, gonna be just the stories of the other people aside from things, and yeah, it's just a fascinating prospect. Gotta give a shout out to Rob Reiner, though, because of the fact that he loved Castle Rock and Stephen King's mythology so much that he named his entertainment company, his production company, after it. So, Castle Rock Entertainment. Have you guys ever seen a movie that was presented by Castle Rock Entertainment? Yeah. Rob Reiner, who was the meathead on All in the Family, which, if you have never watched All in the Family, you youngsters, damn, is it amazing. It was even before my time, but it was one that my parents subjected me to, and with good reason. Norman Lear, I believe, is the guy who developed it, and he did a fantastic job. It was socially conscious, it had a lot to say, funny, dramatic. I love when so many of those emotions come together, because that's what real life is about, right, guys? I mean, come on now. And so he also, after leaving that show, went on to direct Spinal Tap, Stand By Me, Princess Bride, Misery, and he formed this production company. And it's very ironic because Castle Rock, the name Castle Rock, King actually derived that from the 1950s novel Lord of the Flies, and then Castle Rock, their first 90s big screen adaptation, was a version of Lord of the Flies, and that movie is damn good about all of those kids and the craziness, and Yeah, but he also, with his Castle Rock imprint, did the big screen adaptations of Needful Things, Shawshank Redemption, Dolores Claiborne, Green Mile, Hearts in Atlantis, the super shitty Dreamcatcher, which I talked about a few episodes ago. So, yeah, Rob Reiner is obviously, if he's going to name his production company after the king, he is a lover. I'm a lover. I can relate. And I hope all of you have been able to relate to this episode of Hail to Stephen King. It has been supremely fun talking about the extended universe of Stephen King, and I hope that I basically gave you guys just a little taste of how fun it is reading his stuff because so much ties together. It is almost like reading an ongoing comic series or watching a film series where the same characters are coming back or whatever. It's not always like big glimpses into what they're doing, but the fact that there's like a wink and nod. It's almost like in Kevin Smith's universe where, Julie Dwyer, died from a brain hemorrhage and swimming in the pool and everybody's talking about it. It's like those little subtle references and winks and nods, which I think is all that we're going to see in the big screen King universe, but the Castle Rock TV series that Hulu was doing is where we're going to see them really expand upon everything. I'm not sure if it's going to be like Flag cruising around in Christine or anything like that, trying to run over Danny Torrance or something, but hey, it would be kind of cool if that did in fact transpire. So I gotta extend the grande gracias peeps to all of you King fans who have tuned in once again this week. You can catch this weekly and ongoing program here on The Horror Show at youtube.com/The Horror Show channel every single Sunday evening, very, very late, often, because, that's when the spookiest things transpires, late in the nights. You can find me, Jaime and Fuego, on all social media sectors, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, but I'm about to launch on May 1st my own channel, which has kind of been like residing at Jaime and Fuego on YouTube, but it's officially going to be in Fuegotainment. It's officially going to hopefully have no copyright business, similar to the crap that we had to deal with on The Horror Show with getting flagged by studios for either using a song or, trailer reaction stuff where we use too much footage. It's a very fine line that we ride here on YouTube, and even the big boys that I love, like Collider, deal with this crap all the time. So as of May, you will be able to see all of my original content at in Fuegotainment on YouTube, and I look forward to that transition with you guys, and I look forward to bringing you more content about the King every single week. Much love to all of y'all. Long days and pleasant nights, and gracias until the next time. Hasta luego, sin amigos. I hope that it is sooner rather than later, and until next time, stay scared and read Stephen King. That is an order, my friends.